Hello, friends. On this glorious day in drink history, a new voice emerges. With bombastic intentions born out of reckless enthusiasm, it is the aim of this humble broadcast to celebrate spirits and cocktail culture and share the many stories and inspirations that bring it to life. Our medium will be simple conversation, amplified by the marvels of modern technology and fueled by a whimsical reverence for the art and beauty surrounding this most treasured aspect of the human experience. I will be your captain on this adventure, and my name is Alan. And this world of strong drinks and liquid imagination inspires me in ways that defy conventional explanation. But I shall try. Let's do this. This first episode of the Educational Drinking Show is sponsored by Junipero Gin, which is the original American craft gin going back to 1996 and the pioneering work of Fritz Maytag. At 98.6 proof, it's a bit stronger than most gins and perfect in your favorite gin cocktail. My guest for today's episode is Keli Rivers, a longtime bartender who can be found behind the bar in San Francisco at Devil's Acre in Whitechapel. She has an expertise in gin, which has earned her the street name Ginaseur and armed her with countless stories to share, with storytelling really being the foundation for our relationship. I met Ms. Rivers when I interviewed her for another film project we were working on, and she had more stories than we had time, so I was determined to reconnect and dig a little bit deeper. So, kicking things off on this first episode of the Educational Drinking Show, I am pleased to share with you my conversation with the esteemed Keli Rivers. Why do you like gin so much?
Why don't I like gin? Why doesn't anyone like gin? I mean, gin is one of the most perfect spirits. It's interesting on its own. It's got history. It's got body. It elevates cocktails. It basically makes everything better. I've been an advocate of gin for over 20 years. While all my friends were drinking vodka, I was the weird duckling over here going, I want gin because it tastes weird and fun. And also, my family's from the South, and in the daytime, you drank gin, and when the night came, you drank bourbon. So that's just kind of what happened.
And what fascinates you about gin today?
Well, besides the plethora of array of styles and going in with what we're doing with contemporary styles and aging, and then slow gins making a comeback. I mean, since we've been talking, there's been at least 20 new gins that the TTB has approved. And so there's a gin for everybody. It's not just the 4 or 5 big names and then some oddballs in there. And so you're in this gin renaissance that is really great. But with the gin renaissance and so many craft distilleries putting out gin, because, you know, where before they said vodka pays the bills, no one's really drinking vodka and the trend is going down for vodka. But gin also doesn't need to be aged. And so all these craft distilleries, while they're waiting for their whiskey to come out, they're putting out gin. And so more and more gins are coming out on the market. But customers are still in that kind of like, gin is still kind of like that weird, I had one too many when I was in high school or college and I won't touch it, or my grandmother drinks it and that's just kind of odd. But if it's warm, I'll have a gin and tonic, or if I'm trying to impress my date, I'll order a martini that I'll sip for 40 minutes. But with all these new gins, you need someone to like help you navigate through it. Like, why one gin versus another? And so my role at Whitechapel is to navigate people through the over 450 gin lists that we have while curating new and interesting things in the ever-expanding category of gin.
So as someone that's so into gin, what's it like having a platform like Whitechapel with so many gins and such a focus on the category?
Well, it's a great playground that was created for gin lovers. Unfortunately, on the other side, because it's new and it's a beautiful space. We're on the cover of Imbibe's design issue. We're getting a lot of write-up and press. A lot of people come through. And so if you're going there to have that intimate gin experience and you come in on a Friday night, it might be a little bit of a turnoff. So it's the balance between knowing what experience the guest wants. Sometimes people just want to come in and have a vodka soda, which there's nothing wrong with a vodka soda. I mean, easy, quick turnaround. Here you go. Thank you so much. Have a good day. So one thing I get to do when I'm on the floor is I get to be that liaison in between the servers or the bartenders and the guests. So if somebody wants a more intimate, wants to talk a little bit, wants to geek out, I can be there and like talk to them about it and give them some information, or, you know, bounce off ideas or talk about Pisco, you know, whatever they want. And that's really fun. It's a fun way to use what I know in my head and what I love and just like talk to somebody about it, have like a really just interesting conversation.
And what has surprised you about your experience working at Whitechapel?
Wow. Well, it still surprised me how many people, after they had a good gin, they're like, oh, I like that gin, really don't know anything about it. Like, I talk to people about, okay, well, what gins don't you like? And they can't tell me. They can't tell me things that they enjoy about it, or they don't really understand. Someone, a very intelligent man, I asked him, like, so about gin, what is it that you don't like? He's like, well, I just don't like distilled juniper berries. I'm like, okay, so gin's not distilled juniper berries, or just the idea that people are really still unsure about cocktails or unsure about spirits in general, and they don't want to ask. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be wrong. They don't want to ask the questions, and that's really interesting to me. That, you know, you've been drinking for so long, and you don't really know what it is that you're drinking.
Yeah. And what cocktails have your attention right now in the world of gin?
Oh, wow. Well, I love the 20th century.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Tempus Fugit really brought that back into the forefront with the quina, and of course his creme de cacao, which is brilliant and makes the drink. So that's always a good one to play for someone who likes citrus driven but wants some depth and interestingness. And it's classic, but it's not really well known, and so it's still that new one there. You know, because people just lately are just like, oh, I've had that. I want something new. Make me something new. And I'm just like, wow, you know, well, I don't know all your drinking experience, so let me run down all the drinks that I know in my head, and hopefully we'll get one for you. I just did a whole class for the staff at Whitechapel on slow gin, and there was a drink in there called the Charlie Chaplin, mm-hmm. which is going to be slow gin, lime, apricot, eau de vide is in there, a little bit of simple, and that was brilliant, lovely, complex, especially with all the lovely slow gins that are coming out.
Nice. And how do you research at this stage, given your experience with gin? How are you furthering your knowledge?
Well, there's books that come out all the time. I think there was like 2 gin books that came out last year. Dave Broom's gin book is coming mm-hmm. out. Difford's Guide is always, the website is always coming out with new information mm-hmm. on the history plus new products. There's so many new products that are coming out that is just kind of a Wikipedia hole.
Yeah.
I do education for the staff every Wednesday, and so I pick a distillery every Wednesday, and distilleries that I know but didn't like, because I'm teaching people that don't know, I have to go back to the beginning. So it's like a refresher, and there's always something interesting and new to learn about gin. We've got The Gin Is In is a really great website. Summer Cup is a really great website. Just connecting with other people who really like gin, moving back and forth of information.
And if you have to recommend one gin book?
Difford's Guide, Gin Companion, Continuum is really good because it has the entire timeline of history of gin, of all the stuff, plus when all the distilleries open in the back, they have all the brands and ratings and flavor profiles, which is really hard for me because I'll open it and there's like 6 per page, and I'm like, I don't have that one, I don't have that one, I don't have that one. So it's like a giant shopping list, and my home collection is getting a little bit out of control. Just a little bit.
And you guys, I mean, what can you get at Whitechapel that you can't get at most cocktail bars in terms of gin?
Oh, wow. So we have not only gins from, you know, the United States and the classic ones from Europe, we also have vintage and rare. So I think the oldest one we have currently for sale, well, for educational purposes, ABC, we have a 1930s Plymouth. We have a 1950s Gordon's, a lot of vintage and rares that I get to decant and try. Some of them are definitely for educational purpose. You're like, I don't know if I would drink a whole one. But it's really interesting to see where grain distillation and junipers from a certain brand that you know, let's say like Plymouth, where we have multiple different years, you can taste the differences. And some of it is probably bottle and oxidation, but there's still like tasting in the 1930s, Plymouth was really interesting because it was really grain forward. It's really grain heavy, where Plymouth now is much more citrus and botanical based. But this one is like, wow, I can taste the barley, I can taste the rye and the wheat in this, and a little bit on the citrus, which is so prevalent in Plymouth today. So it's really interesting to see where the course of flavor profile that guests want, consumers, how their flavor profiles change, gin products change along with them.
And can age be kind to gin?
Some gins age is kind. We opened up a booths from 1950s, which was cast mellow, and at that time it was in the sherry cask. They just brought it out in sherry casks, and that was so. They first did in the 1950s, and about late 1960s, early 1970s, they decided to go with Bordeaux casks, which altered the flavor. And then, of course, nobody was drinking gin, and so they kind of just stopped the program completely, and they just relaunched it. But the back end sherry. So that one is really interesting to me. That one aged the best. We've opened up some corn vines, Genevers, that did not age very well, but they're also at 32% alcohol. So, didn't really last very long. So some of them have been like not servable.
And what about overlooked applications of gin in cocktails?
Well, I mean, first of all, the overlooked of drinking gin neat. I think that is kind of really interesting, and was the way you drank gin for a very long time until, the birth of cocktails in the 20s and 30s. So drinking gin neat is really interesting. You get different levels in the flavor profile, putting a cube in, using gin in tequila drinks. Because of that saline green marks that both tequila and gin has, or using a fuller bodied, less juniper forward, so more contemporary in whiskey cocktails, or using lighter aged. So the age category is just blowing up right now of gin, which kind of makes a lot of gin enthusiasts kind of scratch their heads, because it's not necessarily what you know is gin. So if you get someone to like gin based on aged gin, they're like, oh, I like gin, and then they go to like Tanqueray, they're like, oh, I don't like gin. So it's kind of that debate back and forth whether or not it is a good trend or a bad trend in gin.
And when we were hanging out last month, you had told me about this this combination of junipero and tropical and pineapple.
Oh yeah, so we have a drink Whitechapel we call it in the Honor Amongst Thieves category, which is where we took recipes, or mostly Alex, because of his cocktail menu. He took recipes from some of his favorite bartenders of really interesting ways of using gin, and it's the Buccaneer. And so it's going to be muddled pineapple, the San Francisco strength junipero, so the higher proof, which kind of stands up to the Campari, the Velvet Falernum, and the citrus in the cocktail. And I found that pineapple, especially fresh pineapple, with those kind of like earth notes and the enzyme and highly juniper gins really work really well together, like that tropical and piney, like green undertone. So there's actually a few pineapple drinks in classic cocktail making with like a London dry gin that's high juniper content.
And what about Genever? I mean, you referenced it before. Where's Genever's place kind of behind the bar today?
Oh, in my mouth. Genever's place is in my mouth. No, so Genever is really interesting. It's what starts the story. It's, Pliny the Elder was like the first diuretic with listing all these botanicals, including a juniper, and then, of course, we had the professor who made the first Genever recipe also as a diuretic, which I always think is really funny. Alcohol is a diuretic. Yes, I know that at 3 a.m. when I have to go to the bathroom. And so, but he did it, and that recipe that the professor did was pretty much the recipe Lucas Bowles took for his Genevers. And because of the fact that it is malted barley, rye, corn, it's put through a pot still. Well, traditionally it was put through a pot still at a low proof, comes off, they separate some of it, put botanicals in that, put botanicals in another, put it back in the still, then blend the two together, because, that was how you got higher proof, but they still wanted that maltiness. And so what ended up happening was, because that was what you drank, and then Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I got really excited about Genever. So what ended up happening was Genever was what it was drank. The VOC did its part and spread it across the trades, and then opened up the oceanic trades, and that got spread. And it went into England, when King James, who was the King of England, was way too much of a supporter of the French and Catholicism, and the Church of England was like, no, no, no. And so they asked his daughter Mary, who was married to William of Holland, to come in and invade England. When they're like, yeah, we totally won't stop you. Come in. And so they came in, and he brought in Geneva into England. And it was the first time that a higher proof spirit, and we're talking about maybe 20% alcohol, maybe with the good stuff, mostly around the teens, was the exact same price as beer. And beer in England at the time was about 2 to 3%. And so it was the same price, and all of a sudden everyone went crazy. They're like, yes, this is the main thing. We have to support our new, our new king of the throne and drink this Geneva. And of course, all hell broke loose in England. And mostly what the interesting part of it, mostly what broke loose and what changed it, and everyone's like, no, Geneva's bad, is the fact that it rose the price of grain. And the two biggest guilds in England were the bakers, the bread guild, and the brewing guild. And actually, to this day, there is no distilling guild in Hull in England. So if you wanted to meet as distillers, you have to borrow someone else's hall. But so basically, these two guilds, which were the biggest supporters of the crown and the Church of England, were like, hey, this is not good for us. We need to stop it. So instead of, putting taxing on grain, because you knew that with bread and beer, they decided to put the taxing on the distillation. And so that's when the 8 acts of England and all that stuff. And yeah, I just went down the rabbit hole in Geneva.
Which all worked out tremendously well.
Well, it did and it didn't. It kind of went underground. All the distillers went up to Scotland. But Geneva kind of lost its foothold, because it lost its foothold because of the fact that there was no more distillers. And so Old Tom came around as kind of like that, we'll just, get distillate grain out of Scotland and we'll just put botanicals after the fact. And, that's Old Tom, and it's kind of a cold compound, a lot more licorice because it was cheap. And so it was kind of the sweeter thing people liked. And then, of course, with the introduction and during the Industrial Revolution, you had the column still, and all of a sudden people were distilling at higher proof, faster, cheaper, and this new style of London dry gin came about, and that was refined. So it was okay. It was okay to drink gin again. It was because the Queen drank gin because it was London dry.
And word on the street is that this is all of your enthusiasm for gin is going to turn up at Tales of the Cocktail this year as a seminar.
It is. It's, hopefully in much more, I've got a lot of really great panelists to reel my enthusiasm in and not do a 2-hour seminar just on Geneva itself. So yeah, it's a 3-part seminar. It's going to be on Friday. It's called Juniper Ascending, the Epic Tale of Gin. So the first one is going to be about Geneva and Old Tom. The second one's going to be about the London Dry. And then third is the contemporary and the new Western movement. And I've got some really great panelists from Philip Duff, gin, evangelist. I've got Tom Nickel on the board, former master distiller at Tanqueray. We've got Desmond Payne, master distiller at Beefeater, will be on. Kristen Krosgrav from House Spirits will be there. Some really other great, amazing people that have agreed to do it. Simon Ford, of course, will be there. Can't talk about gin without Simon Ford in the room drinking it all. So, yeah, I'm really enthusiastic. It's going to be really great. It's only the third 3-part series that Tales has ever done.
Wow. That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, the first one was about how to run a business. The second one was about vermouth. And then this is going to be just kind of overarching tale of gin. At the end, you get a handshake and a certificate for getting through Mother's Room Reform Society. So,
and if you were a betting woman, what's next for gin? What does the future of gin look like?
Oh, wow. So this is a question I get a lot. Where is gin going? Well, hopefully continually forward. I think that right now we're kind of where whiskey was about, 10 years ago. Like, people are just kind of tipping their toe in it. They kind of like it, but they're staying true to what they were. And all of a sudden, like, the distillers and the craft movement is like, no, this is where you've got to go. And it's opening the floodgates. And so I see a lot more aged gins. I was just at the ADI's, the American Distiller Institute, doing gin tasting. And one of our favorite ones was completely a surprise, was actually a flavored gin with coconut and mango.
Wow.
So I see a lot more of that as opposed to, because it's going in England, like with tangerine and rhubarb and elderflower flavored gins. But here in the United States, it's not been so because flavored is that weird bad category. But when you put like really good actual whole fruits into it, it's not so bad. So you're going to see a lot more of that. You're going to see a lot more gins that are created for specific styles of cocktails. Like you're going to get gins for tiki. That's happened in the last few years with Privateer has done a tiki. Letherby's have done a tiki style gin. You're also going to be seeing a lot more savory gins. Seaweed seems to be the really big trend lately. I know there's a distillery in Oakland that just put out a seaweed gin. There's Cambridge Distillery that put out the Japanese gin with Japanese botanicals and seaweed. De Mele also put out a seaweed gin. So you're getting a little more of those savory qualities that are coming out.
And I guess switching gears, you also work behind the bar at Devil's Acre. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So Devil's Acre is part of the Future Bars group. We're a little over a year old. We're on Columbus and Broadway. So it is a pharmaceutical, sorry, that's not even a word. Pharmacy, apothecary, that's not a word either. Turn of the century bar. I'm product of the Oakland Public School System. I can't pronounce anything. So, but it's turn of the century. So what we're doing is we're celebrating the Barbary Coast style of drinks, late 1800s, early 1900s, with soda fountain and tinctures for medicine purposes, because, you know, you need to have your medicine when you drink your booze.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do a lot of rum, Genevers, gins, brandies, piscos, and whiskey drinks.
Wow.
Yeah.
So very different.
So very different. So I have my heart in my heart belongs to gin,
Mm-hmm.
but I do love the history of other things. I used to work at Hardwater, so talk about American whiskey there. I love being at Devil's Acre and talking about brandies and piscos and rums, and mostly about cocktails. It's all about the cocktail there and the history, and especially the history in San Francisco.
And it's such a beautiful space.
It is. It is a very gorgeous space. They did a really good job. It's open. It's got windows. It's a future bar with windows.
Mm-hmm.
That's really nice. We have live music Sunday through Thursday. So.
And what's your process there for developing the drink menu and really digging into that history and the vision behind the bar?
Well, when we first opened up with the menu, we basically went to the classics that would be found in San Francisco. So the Pisco Punch, the julep that you would find in San Francisco at the time would be brandy base,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what was coming in through South America. They would stop, the sailors would stop, South America because there's no Panama Canal. They would refuel. They would pick up this unaged brandy because they would drink all of their brandy and whiskey and gin already. So they'd pick up more. They would stop off in San Diego. They would come up to San Francisco. And so they would bring this brandy with them. And we also had all the missionaries would have brandy styles also. And so there was a lot of grape-based spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Pisco actually for a very long time was the most expensive spirit in San Francisco, most sought after. And we're getting back to that. We have now, I think, 10 different piscos behind the bar. So
Nice.
People are getting more into it, where I couldn't sell pisco to anybody 5 years ago. People are actually coming in and asking and knowing the differences between the styles. So that's really exciting. The guests and the clientele are much more enthusiastic and more willing to try things. And so when we make drinks, we take what the classic is and then we kind of tweak it for still to people's flavor profile.
And outside of gin, other categories, what has your attention right now?
Well, I really, American whiskey is still really interesting, working in it for so long and seeing how at every step of the way where it's going, and then also the shortages. And so now we're having rareability and collectability where it wasn't before. I opened up a American whiskey bar about 14 years ago in Berkeley, and we had the largest American whiskey selection at that time because people were still drinking a lot of scotch. So a lot of whiskey bars were bigger, but a lot of scotch. And so I saw the menu and we were selling Pappy 20 for $19 a shot and A.H. Hirsch with the wax for $20 a shot. So I said that if I ever got a time machine, I would go back and save the whiskey. So yeah, it's really interesting to see where it's going and what's happening. We're seeing more people in tequila industry going about sustainability, and I see that with whiskey and Japanese whiskey and scotches, where all the stuff is now everyone's hungry for it and consuming it. It's just no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the next steps? How do we make it? How do we appease the people that want it, but we don't have it? So you're getting a lot more thought process going into it.
Absolutely. And have you done any traveling lately?
Lately, my boyfriend and I went to Hawaii.
Yeah?
It was my first time in Hawaii. I'm not a like sunny, beachy kind of girl.
No?
So we went to Hawaii. Took me a while to find gin, but we found some. We found a distillery actually making a gin. Hasn't been released. The TTB okayed the label, so it should be out shortly. It's a pineapple base, which was really, really interesting talking to him about that. And then my birthday is coming up, and so I'm being taken to London and Paris in May.
Ah.
Yeah, I was also told that we could only go to 4 distilleries. And so I said, 6 sounds great. Thanks, honey.
There's a lot to see.
Yeah.
And a lot of bars to check out, too.
A lot of really amazing bars. Check out our friends over at Sipsmith are letting us stay at the apartment above the distillery, so that doesn't actually count at being a distillery, right?
Nope, absolutely
not.
not.
I don't think so.
And what bars are on your list to check out?
Oh, Nightjar.
Yeah.
Definitely Nightjar. Pearl, the American, Savoy, just, all of them. There's a long list.
All the standards?
Yeah, I can't tell them on air because then my mother will watch and then she'll think I'm an alcoholic more than she already does. But that's why the education, like I have to justify my drinking by knowing things.
Yeah.
So my parents get worried and I'm like, but Mom, don't you understand that this gin was created
trivia.
originally in 19th, and then I bore them and then they stop asking me questions.
How did you get into the industry to start with?
So my parents were both civil workers for the government. Worked for the DoD, the Department of Defense, the Navy, the Army. I traveled a lot as a kid. So dinner time was them talking about how much they hated their jobs. And so I'm like, I was a little kid. I'm like, oh, working behind a desk. Hate job. Got it. Don't want to do that. And then I hate waking up in the morning. I've always hated waking up in the morning. I was that kid on Christmas that when my sister came in and said, hey, Santa's been here, I'm like, he'll be there when I'm done. Let me go back to sleep. So the idea of the hours of working in the afternoon to night and sleeping all day was very, very appealing when I was younger. And so I remember we were out to dinner once. I think it was 7. We were in Auberge d'Ile in France, a Michelin 3-star restaurant. I grew up in Bavaria. I should start that. I grew up in Europe, so it was just a quick drive. A quick drive to France. And it was like 10 of my father's friends, and there was no iPads. There was no coloring books. Like, you just sat there and had to, like, listen to adults talk. And so I would get up and go to the bathroom, and after the second time or third time, my mother, who thought I had a problem. She just told me this a few years ago when I told her the story. She's like, I just thought you had a problem as a kid. I was really worried. I'm like, maybe that's all those doctors' appointments that we went to that I had no idea why. And so I would go by myself, and I got lost. And I ended up walking into the kitchen and mortified that I got lost, and now this ruined my chance to ever get up from the dinner table again without a parent. And I just watched them, and it was like this really quiet dance, and somebody was talking in very hushed tones, so nothing like you see in television or movies where everyone's yelling and stuff and throwing pots and pans, or at least when I was there. And it was just like this weird dance of guys in coats, and then they noticed me, and I was like a little short girl with red hair, and they gave me chocolate, and I was like, ooh, the bathroom has mints, the kitchen has chocolate, I'm just gonna get lost every time now. And so they shooed me along my way, and I just fell in love with that. And so I decided at a very young age I wanted to be a chef. And so I went to culinary school, and which is funny is the culinary school that I went to in San Francisco, the CCA, California Culinary Academy, which is no longer there, is actually right across the street from where Whitechapel is. So I actually drank in that bar on Fridays.
Wow.
So after school on Fridays, when we had day classes, we would go over to it was the Embassy Lounge at the time because it's in the Embassy Hotel, and we'd go in, and the bar was totally different place. The bar was on the other side. There was windows. And so we'd go in, and all my friends, the big product that was out was puckers. So everybody was drinking like Jolly Ranchers is what it was. A melon ball, but they called it Jolly Ranchers, and it was neon green. I was like, that's not a natural color. I'm not putting that in my mouth at all. And so I drink Tom Collins. But paying my way through culinary school, and then on top of it, my parents were in Japan at the time. I was staying at their house paying their mortgage. I was 21 years old and had a lot of bills, so I couldn't really drink. And there was like this old school bartender behind the bar, and he was like, if you know a drink that I don't know and I know them all, your drink is free. I was like, huh. So my parents had this like 1950s Mr. Boston. So I would go home before like Friday, and I would like pick a drink with like 2 or 3 ingredients and memorize it, the name and the proportions and what it was. I didn't really know what I was drinking. And I would go in that Friday and I'm like, go up to the bar like I knew what I was talking about. I'm like, I want a Godfather. And he's like, well, what's that? And I'm like, it's scotch and amaretto. And he was like, all right. He's like, that's not a drink. And he would go to the book and he was like, oh, it is a drink. And I got this really nasty drink in front of me that I got to drink, but it was free. That was the point. This is before that people refrigerated vermouth and the bitters were probably like 30 years old. But I would go in, 2 drinks for free. And I'm like, that's how I drink. And that's kind of how I learned the classics. So it's kind of full circle that I now work at Whitechapel. But that's kind of, so I went to culinary school and I did my internship in Tokyo. And while I was there, I got some more classes at the Cordon Bleu in Tokyo, and I got a BA in Saucier and Grand Manger, and I have an AOS in pastry and culinary arts.
Wow.
And so while I was there, I was working in a kitchen, and they didn't pay because it was an internship, but I still had to live, and so a friend of mine got me a cocktail waitress job at a bar in Roppongi, which is the club district in Japan, in Tokyo. And so I'd basically walk around with like a laminated menu because you had to have a drink in your hand to stay in, and I would like flash a light at my chest and point to these people who didn't speak English, and I'm like, what drink do you want? And they would just point one. I would go and ring it in, and that's people would drink. And so that's what I did for money, and that was like my first cocktail waitressing job in Japan. And I remember it was like 3 months in, and I got 3rd-degree burn, and so I didn't go to work for a while, and I had this arm bandage and it itched. And I remember my first day back because I needed money at cocktail waitressing. It was really, really warm, really hot and sweaty, and it just itched. So I took the bandage off, and it was like one giant blister over my entire arm. I got an iron dropped on my arm. And so a whole big blister. And I remember it was Chumbawamba's song, and they were just like, everybody was like jumping up and down with the drinks in their hands. Somebody knocked their vodka soda onto my arm. Maybe the reason I don't like vodka sodas, I don't know. But it like burned, and it was so loud, and I was like screaming. The guy like was like, whatever, and he took his arm and he wiped off the vodka soda, which popped all the blisters.
Oh.
It's the first guy I ever also kicked out of a bar.
Oh.
And so I went behind the bar, and I had it like in this kind of lukewarm water, and the bartender's like, well, while you're back here, make drinks. So I was like, they were easy drinks, like 1 or 2 or 3 ingredients. I think the drink du jour in Tokyo at that time, and this was back in 98, was the Harvey Wallbanger. That was like the thing. And so it's like, make all these drinks. And the next time I went in, I went to go look for my plastic sign and my flashlight, and it wasn't there. And they're like, no, you're much better behind the bar. And that was my first bartending job.
Whoa.
So I would always, my heart was always in cooking, but I would bartend on the side because bartending pays. So when I came back to the United States, and my first cooking job, very prestigious at Plump Jack's, when Gavin Newsom's family still owned it, was making $7.25 an hour.
Whoa.
So I still bartended on the side for money. And then I got the chance to manage bars quite a few years later. And so I kind of started doing that, transitioning out of the kitchen.
Why never pursue cooking?
Well, no, I worked in kitchens for a very long time.
Oh, okay.
But bartended on the side. So I was in kitchens for 12 years.
Okay.
And did all those things. And then I worked in a restaurant, and I worked in the kitchen, and then they needed help redoing their bar program. And so I did both. And then I took over the bar program with a really good friend of mine. And then we did the bar programs in like 4 of their restaurants. And then from there, I kind of just like stayed in the bar because I was like, I'm kind of burnt out on the kitchen. I'll go back. And I did a lot of private cooking for 10 years. My really good friend is the personal chef for the Gettys. So I did a lot of parties there and got to cook for Prince Charles and Camilla. And I got the Obamas and the Clintons and Barbara Boxer and do the Google wedding. So
it's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to see how the other side live.
So what else are you working on? What else is in the pipeline for you?
Oh, wow. What's in the pipeline? Days off. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah?
Days off. No. So Devil's Acre, what I am getting to do is redoing the training program. So try to do a lot more mentorship. That's kind of where my heart is in the community in San Francisco. I think that there's a lot of really great bartenders and more every day, but there's not a lot of like sharing, for some of the old school, sharing their knowledge with people that are coming up. Because, they're doing their own things. They're having kids and family, but there's still a lot of things that, that need to be said. Like, this is how it's done. And So I'm the president of LUPEC, Ladies United for the Preservation of the Endangered Cocktail here in San Francisco. So we do a lot of stuff with that and trying to get, people new and people been in the industry for a while to like just talk to each other and give like ideas. And then I also do Girls with Bowls advocacy, which is a program that Lucas Bowles did, just again for mentorship and just getting aware of, that there's people out there that you can talk and not just put on Facebook, hey, hive mind, how do I do this kind of a thing. And then also I do cocktail book club once a month where we take a cocktail book and we each read a chapter because everyone's busy. Can't read the whole book, and then we talk about it while drinking. See, education, justifying the drinking. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Just trying to continually learn, continually just educate.
So if there are ladies up and coming in the bartending community that want to get more involved with some of those organizations that you mentioned, what advice do you have for them?
Well, stalk your favorite bartender on a day that's not busy. No, you can. There's the Facebook groups that you can apply to. Join your local USBG. If you're a bartender, there's that. If you're just a novice and an enthusiast, you can also join. Get to know the community. Another really good one is the Quesa Happy Hours that they do 3 times a year. Is a really good way to like stand in front of them when they're not super busy making one drink and just like pick their brain. You can always email me at kelly@whitechapelsf.com if you have any questions about gin in general or anything else. I always like happily answering people's inquiries. It does take me like 2 or 3 days. So just, I'm a bartender. We don't really get back very quickly, especially during non-office hours.
And can you talk to me about mentoring and training and what you've learned and what your approach is now to helping develop the bartenders you work with?
Well, I have learned that they do not like being swiped with a wet newspaper. I found that one out. They don't really...
A little trial and error there?
Yeah. Does not respond very well to the water bottle and the newspaper trick. I don't know why. That's how I always learned. It's actually really interesting to see when I started in the industry, especially in the kitchen, to where it is now. I talk to a lot of new managers that are having a hard time communicating or getting their point across. Because when I started, when somebody told you to do something, you asked how. Like, how do you want me to do this? And now the question how went into why. Why do you want me to do this? And for me, being in the industry as long as I have, which is 24 years, it is a definitely mental change. You have to like step back from how I learned and like, okay, it's going to take me a little more communication and let me talk to you about why. And so that's in my training and my mentoring. That's a lot of it is like, you have to do it from the most information to get to them. So instead of like the way you take information, think about how they take information and try to get it to understand from that. There's a great Stanford study, well, great and scary, but really great, that started about 20 years ago that studied the attention span of a 24-year-old.
Whoa.
Which is the age going into the workforce. And it was mostly for, big conglomerates, big corporations. And 20 years ago, the attention span of a 24-year-old was about 24 seconds.
Wow.
They did it 10 years ago. It was about 12 seconds. 2 years ago when they did it, it was 6 seconds, which is less than a goldfish.
Whoa.
So knowing that it's a different way of educating, a different way of mentoring, a different way to talk it is a really great start into doing your training program. And so when I talk to people or I educate people on gin or spirits or the cocktail history, I try to make it as relatable. Like I like dates. I come from, my father wanted to be a history teacher. I loved history and dates and stuff. But I find to be the only person that likes all that information. And so when I tell dates to people, I'm like, people instantly get like deer in the headlights. They're like, oh, wait, I got to remember this. There's going to be a test after this. Like I'm going to fail. And they shut down. And so usually I'll say, when I'm in the beginning, I'm like, I like dates. I'm going to throw it out there. Don't really worry about it too much. But it's a good way to understand what's happening in the world around you. And so I might go off on tangents a little bit, but it's just like it gets me to understand like why was it that everybody was so down on gin in the 1700s and blamed it for the death rate being higher than the birth rate for the first time. They blamed gin. Well, maybe they blamed gin because they didn't want the grain prices to be so expensive and not because it killed all the people, because You also have, open sewers, and the plague was still going on, and there was no, there was no hospital. So that might have also helped, and population growth went up. So that might have also helped the fact that the death rate was higher. But it's good to blame gin. And so for me, it's a good way to say, yeah, so this is what they did, but really, this is what's happening. And people really relate to that. Oh, I know the secret. I like the secret. Give me the shortcut. And so that's a really good way I find for educating people is to make it personable, giving them a story, talking about spirits. I can talk about brands, what year they open, how they distill, the size of the still. But if I say, hey, the distiller used to be worked in the ER in Oakland, then they have a little bit more personality and they have something to relate to and something that they can hold on to.
So it sounds like, having knowledge and this ability to tell stories and incorporate that into the service elements pretty important to you and your bartenders.
Well, it's important to me. I don't know about my bartenders. Sometimes they just pat me on the head. They're like, yeah, Kelly, it's good. Thanks. I mean, there is the too much knowledge kind of thing, too much information. Just I can't really put everything down that I wanted to and get off topic. But it's really important to me to associate or have some history or have something. It's not just a drink. I mean, coming from the food industry where it went from salad to, farm name salad to farm name picked by so-and-so salad and seeing the trends there that people want to know. They want to know where it's sourced. Right now, the big thing is, especially in whiskey, are you milling your own grain or are you getting neutral grain spirit on the open market? And it's not that it's a bad thing to get neutral grain spirit. It's not at all. And it's been happening since the beginning of distillation. But now they're associated that with lesser product. And so, the information's out there and people get it, but they don't really understand it. They're like, oh, you don't distill your own grain? Well, your stuff's not good.
Yeah.
But that's not true. And so it's hey, did you know that this product you like and this product you like and this product you like are all the same mash bill and they all come, but so there's science in distillation, but the art is in what you do with it.
Do you think transparency, what's going on with transparency in terms of distilled products and where's the trend headed?
Well, I think the trend is definitely headed into transparency. I think people want it regardless if they know what to do with it.
Yeah.
A lot of brands why do I now have to tell you? You didn't care 10 years ago. Well, there's more information and there's more people that want to know and sound smarter than their peers. And so you need to do it. I mean, with the lawsuits of what handmade is or that kind of stuff, you need to know where it's coming from. And, at Hardwater, we have a rule that we only do American aged. And if you're not telling us that you're getting where you're getting your neutral grain spirit from, we can maybe assume that it's Canadian. And because we have such a small space, not Canadian spirit's not bad, but that's just what the bar is.
Yeah.
So if you don't tell us and you're not very forthcoming, then we're like, why aren't you so forthcoming? Is there something that we should know? And then it just puts that little double thought in your head that doesn't need to be there. And so I think transparency is where you need to go. I mean, at Whitechapel, we do our gin book and we put all the botanicals and spirit base in the book. So people just give them somebody else ooh, I didn't know that they have watermelon rinds in this gin. That's really interesting. Or I really like cinnamon. What's all the gins that have a cinnamon in it? Not necessarily taste it, but have it in the botanicals. And when I call distillers to try to get their botanical recipes, the older schooled distillers and distilleries are very tight-lipped. They don't want to tell you. And I'm like, I don't think any of our guests are going to go around and try to recreate your product. But even if you gave us every single list, you're not giving us where you're sourcing it from or what proportions or if it's a maceration, percolation, or what you're doing with it. It's just another information. And I think people, especially in gin, need the information to be able to navigate through the different styles.
It's kind of an issue for us here at Acre with Junipero because, I mean, like you were saying, it's this old school mentality. And when they were making Junipero, it was the first.
Yeah.
So they got into this habit of keeping everything super secret, and they never got out of that habit. So to this day, I don't even know.
I know. I got that phone call. They're like, well, I can tell you some things that are in it, but the rest of it are secret ingredients. And I'm like, oh, guys, really? I mean, but that's also the thing with mentoring and education from the old school, I mean, like the old guard San Francisco bartenders to the new ones. Like, there is still that, well, I'm not going to give away all my secrets. And I'm like, but let's make the community better. Like, let's give them our secrets. Let's give them the tools. What they do with it, that's their own, you know? And that's what I really believe. Like, I put all my gin notes into Google Docs and on Evernote. And if you want to subscribe to them or pick them up, as long as you don't comment on my spelling or my grammar, people are more than welcome to it because the education's out there. And if I get something wrong, I want people to tell me. Like, well, actually, it's this. I'm like, great. Now I know, and I can stop, and I can tell everybody else this is the way it is.
Beyond knowledge and storytelling, what do you really appreciate in your bartenders? And also, when you're a guest at a bar, what do you look for in a great bar experience?
So a great bar experience for me is being able to not notice what's going on the other side of the bar. Being in the industry for as long as I have, going out to eat and drink, I can't turn the manager off. I can't turn the bartender off. I'm always constantly like, ooh, what are they doing? How many times did they start? Not to be like a dick about it, but just that's I'm learning, but I'm also kind of curious about it. Like, how do they set up their wheels? What kind of jiggers are they using? Are they doing like European style? So a really great bar experience is like usually 2 drinks in where I've stopped it. And I can just enjoy the person that I'm with, the company that I'm having, the drinks. I get really excited about new flavor profiles and combinations that I wouldn't think of. I really get excited about creativity behind the bar and doing something slightly different. I'm a classic. I like people always like, what variations of the Negroni do you like? I'm like, on the rock. That's my variation. It's a classic cocktail. Try not to, But for my birthday a few years ago, for the entire month, I did a Negroni that the bartender wanted from a different bartender in San Francisco. Like 1 Negroni a day, which is really difficult. Doesn't sound so bad, but it was really difficult to do. But whichever way you wanted to do it. And I got a lot of variations, and it got me out of my own mindset of this is the way it is. And the great thing about my boyfriend is, this is me. This is the way it is. And he's like, but if you do it this way. I'm like, no, this is the way it is. He's like, but if you do it this way. I'm like, no, this is the way it is. But if I was going to do it slightly different, I'd do it this way. And so we really balance each other out in cocktail making. He's really like, I want to do the weird and crazy with garnish. And I'm like, why? He's like, because it's cool and it looks good and it tastes good. And I'm like, but it was fine over here. I don't understand. So it's doing that and seeing that more in the bartenders that are coming up. Because where I came from, it was very classic. Like, this is the way you do it. And I'm going to stand there. I'm going to be professional. And people are like, why do you look so unhappy? I'm like, no, I'm happy. I'm just professional. And he's over there, like, throwing things in the air. And everyone's like, ooh, shiny. And I'm like, God damn it. So, it's going to see a bar or a program that I wouldn't do, but seeing the enjoyment of it really makes me happy.
It's such a cool time right now because, coming out of the 90s, it seemed like the trend was just trying not to suck and make a great cocktail objectively. Yeah. But as we've come out of that, it's become more subjective, and there's all these different ways of doing it right and expressing creativity.
Yeah, there was definitely like, all right, well, we had the dark ages. Now we have to make good stuff. And let's infuse everything. Let's do the infusions of everything. I remember having a bar program with all these jars in the window, and we did a brunch program with like 6 different Bloody Marys, and one of them took 5 minutes, and I had to work brunch because none of the other bartenders wanted to deal with it. It was my program. And I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like, we had 6 egg white drinks, but that's what you were doing. You did everything. You couldn't say no to anything, so I had to do everything. And then it was just like, all right, now we're going back to the classics and stirred and peeled and just going back in the history and finding these weird, funky recipes and doing that because the products got better. Like, you got creme de violette that was good, and you got like sloe gin that wasn't like syrupy cough syrup. So that was good. And then all of a sudden, you went from there. It's like, okay, well, now you had the Eric Adkins mentality of, it's like, well, you know how to make a good drink. Now let's talk about hospitality and figure out that. And so we went through that stage where it's all about the guests and, the steps of service and things like that, which is great, and making drinks. And now it's like you're going into, especially with, what they're doing in LA and New York and some bars in San Francisco, it's like, let's bring the fun back to it. We know how to make a good drink. We have the good recipes. We have the good products. We know hospitality. Now let's let's do the entertainment and keep our guests wanting to come back, because there's a bar that's opening up every day, and you get them for 3 months because you're the new thing, and then they go on to the next new thing and the next new thing, and then you're sitting there goes, well, where's all my guests? And so you got to keep a way to keep them engaged. So you have things like Trick Dog that change the menu every 3 months, and so you're trying to make it fun again.
Plus, there's all these new products coming out.
Oh, yeah. There's so many products coming out.
Yeah, which really, I think, opens things up creatively for bartenders to do things you really couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago. It's so nice. The creme de cacao, like you had mentioned earlier, is so
good.
like tasty.
My favorite is the creme de noyau because I like pink squirrels. Yes. I love a pink squirrel. You know what it makes a really good jelly.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How so?
So you can, there's two great guys out of England. They're called the Jellymongers, and
It's a great name.
Yeah. Well, they created a book, and it basically is like all these alcoholic, like jelly molds or Jello shots for you Americans, but they're called jellies, and they do all this stuff. And so when I was working at Coachman, we would do Negroni 3 different ways, and one of them would be the jelly, or like in a Jello, but you would do it in a peel of an orange, and you do layer of Campari, layer of gin, layer of sweet vermouth. And in doing so, I found that if you took sheeted gelatin, you could gellify. One sheet of gelatin would gellify 3.5 fluid ounces of anything.
Really?
Yeah. So we would like just jelly anything when we were slightly bored. And so one of my favorite was to do the pink squirrel, which is going to be creme de noyau, cream, and creme de cacao. But the way my great aunt, who taught me how to bartend when I was 7, she likes to add brandy because everything's better with brandy, she'd say.
Wise woman.
Yes. She would always, my favorite quote, she would ask her, I was like, Aunt Liz, what's your favorite drink? And she would always say the same thing. The next one, honey. The next one.
Yes. Little country wisdom. Can't go wrong.
No.
Well, thank you so much
You're
for coming in here and sharing some stories and sharing some time. I knew you'd be fantastic. I had such a great time interviewing you for the Pisco Doc last month, and I'm sure we will cross paths many more times in the future.
Well, you can find me behind the bar at Devil's Acre, and we can have some alcoholic sodas and some medicine, and then again at Whitechapel, and we can talk all the gin.
Game on, winning. Let's do it.
All right.